All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Haley. I'm here with Andy. I'm a delegate for the Queens DSA chapter. Queens thinks it's a chapter for the NYC chapter. I'm also a member of the Tempest Collective, and we're live here with a discussion debrief on the first day of the Tempest Convention. You want to introduce yourself, Andy?
Yeah, hey, I'm Andy. I'm from the Madison, Wisconsin chapter. I have been a DSA member since 2017, and I'm also a member of the Tempest Collective.
Oh, and I should say, this is my first convention. I think it's not your first convention, Andy.
It is my second convention.
Cool. Well, let's get started. We have a few topics we want to cover just to go over, kind of taking a big step back and talking about, for people who are new to this, what is the convention for? What are we expecting to happen in the next few days, what already happened, and some analysis from us on what it all means, what are the key takeaways. So with that, I'm just turning on my timer so I don't go too over time. I was going to just start, as I said, with sort of like, what is a convention for? So the convention period is really an opportunity for us to talk about what should the priorities of the DSA be for the next 2 years? What should the key campaigns be? What should the key strategy discussions be? How should we approach things? And, it's the highest decision-making body of the organization. So, all the people who are coming here are elected delegates, are people who've been chosen by their branches to represent them at this body and to engage in the discussions. Of course, as a multi-tendency organization. So there's lots of underlying debates and discussions and differences on strategy that inform where people are coming from as they come here to decide what is the next steps for the organization. What I also think is really key, and what I honestly think is not really that present in this DSA convention, when I think about conventions in any political organization, is that it has to be informed by an understanding of where we are now. In other words, I can have the best ideas in the world. Obviously, we're socialists. We know that we have some very good ideas about how the world should run. But if they don't match up with people's reality, and if they don't match up with what people are prepared to do, what we have the capacity to do, and what opportunities exist in the world for pushing left-wing politics, then they're going to fall flat. So we have to start out with that big step back. Where are we in the world? And that really, to me, is something that is not that present at DSA. We had this long pre-convention period, which was mostly focused on things like, what are the things that DSA has already done right, or what people perceive to be right. What elections have we won? What campaigns are we engaged in? It's very much a time to kind of just pat DSA on the back for things that people already are very excited about. And that's great, but it doesn't actually set us up very well to then say, where do we go from here? What are some of the things we haven't actually done so well? What are some of the challenges? How do we have honest assessments that allow us to then move from there and decide, what needs to change? Is the organization growing? What has been successful in one chapter versus another? And how do we take those lessons and put them into the coming period? The other thing is the way the convention is set up. There are a few days that, like yesterday, were mostly focused on procedures and how the convention is going to be structured, and people vote on that. There are other days where there are debates on different proposals, but the vast majority of the next few days, starting today through to Wednesday, is kind of like how-to sessions, like how to bring ideas back to your branch. There's like a labor 101 session. There's a lot of things that are useful if you're a brand new member, but really I think things that don't actually draw out important debates, like their debates on the rank and file strategy. What does it mean to actually be a worker, a socialist worker in your workplace, and what should that look like? Should people be taking staff positions or not? There are lots of debates around things like that. There's debates around how we relate to the international question. What does it mean to be in solidarity with movements in other countries, especially that call themselves socialists? There's different types of socialism. Are they actually things that we think advance democracy and advance worker struggles, or can they actually be setbacks? So there's lots of questions that I think, the best way to actually use the convention period would have been for us to have those things happen now and have that out in the open. Instead, what happened is lots of delegates read, all of the proposals, had no opportunity to be in conversation with each other except in the context of caucuses discussing these things, sort of behind the scenes with each other, or maybe loosely in their branches, but not really out in the open. And those debates did not then inform how people voted on what would be the main criteria, the main things that would be considered priorities for the convention. So, to me, there's very good things that obviously this is an organization where there are 1,000 delegates coming to participate, and there's interest in trying to figure these discussions out. But in my opinion, I don't think we're quite set up to actually have all of those strategy discussions and debates out in the open, so they're clear and they actually make people feel confident that they actually know what they're voting on. So that, I kind of wrap up with that, but I think that's sort of where we're at. And, Andy's going to talk a little bit more about what actually happened at this first day, but I'll leave it if you want to say anything else on that.
Yeah. So in general, in the briefest, like a pre-convention period, like you have to have one because there's only limited time during a convention, right? Like we don't have infinite time at an actual convention. So as prepared as you can possibly be for making decisions and having clarity about what's being debated is usually the point of a pre-convention. So what the political stakes are and what the positions are. And so when you get to the floor, you're not trying to figure out like, wait, what are we debating? I don't understand who's for what. You can be confident and be prepared that you've used the time before the convention well. And so that was something that was kind of absent. They did set up like a Slack, but it was entirely based off of the resolutions and the individual merits of those. And it actually has only been like 2.5 weeks or so. So a very, very compressed pre-convention period. And the same was true last time. I am going to talk really quickly, though, about what actually happened convention day one. So the first day of convention is always the unfun business stuff. So the convention has to start off by getting all of the technical stuff worked out. So this was an online convention. So there was a whole lot of time where they had to kind of make sure that people understood how it would work. So a lot of time was taken out for that. But before saying anything else, no actual substantive political debates were had yesterday. Like there was no resolutions that came up where we debated politics. So the purpose of this first day is almost entirely to take care of like the pre-business of the convention. So what ended up happening is that there was an initial check-in period, and that people just got situated. The actual technical stuff about the convention was pretty complicated. So there is like a portal that takes you to a Zoom. Then you have a delegate key, which gives you multiple windows you have to open to vote. Another Airtable to get on Stack. Another if you have a technical issue. Then they also inform people that we would have to have the Slack open in case that somebody needed to get in touch with you. So it was pretty involved in terms of like all of the technical stuff, and took some time to get used to that. So that check-in happened. The convention then goes through and did the initial reports. So 3 reports were given at the top. The first one was from Maria Svart, who was the national director of DSA. The second one was by Jen McKinney, who is the the chair of the steering committee, and then the third one, the finance committee, or the finance report by Christian, who and that went over kind of where we're at. A lot of those were written down, so I won't go over too much of what was in there, but I think one of the most important things was that Maria's report kind of situated where we're at and the limitations, and she used the phrase that we have to be prepared for some sobering realities, which the most significant of which was that the growth of DSA membership has, in her words, slowed to a trickle. So DSA for the last 4 years has been riding this wave of kind of linear growth, strong linear growth. So we've moved from 5,000 members to almost 100,000 over a period of 4 years. But her report stated that has really tapered off, and that we're now operating in a very different context. The organization is also operating at a slight deficit, and so that was an important from the top report. After that, we moved into the credentialing of the delegates. So before you can just show up and start voting, they have to make sure that you're good to go. So if any weirdness happened at the chapter level on the way to convention, like if there was somebody saying that their election wasn't fair or any of that stuff, they can file a challenge. So there were 2 of those that we had to deal with. So that was the first actual business that the first votes ended up really being about what we were going to do about these delegate challenges. I'm not going to go too much into those. And then after that, the real business that took up most of the day was setting out the rules for the convention. So the convention delegates have to agree to rules before they can actually do anything. So that is what took up the largest portion of the day. What was significant here is that the convention committee in the months before convention released a bunch of documents about how this convention was going to work, and one of those was that there were standing rules, so everybody could understand how the convention would work and interact with it. So at the top of the rules committee explanation, they pointed out that they actually had made changes that day. So that became clear when there was when they were stating that, we've changed some thresholds. What was 10%? Well, they just said it is 33%. I made a motion to say, like, is that correct? Did you misspeak? No, actually, we've made a number of changes. So whatever you read, that's not actually what is being proposed right now. So that's a huge deal. We can talk about that more, but it's really disconcerting that you've got months where you're operating and you're supposed to understand these rules, and then you kind of get the rug pulled out from you the night before or the day of, really, that now we're dealing with something completely different and we don't actually know what all of those are. There was the convention committee recommended that they use the board account again. This is the same thing that happened in 2019, is that they came, said we want to use the board account. There was a challenge to that, and so the convention went against the committee's recommendation and said we're going to use single transferable vote. So that's good. And then there was a lot of discussion around the consent agenda before finally adjourning. So, if you're bored by this, it's because it's a lot of technical stuff right now. So it was hours and hours and hours of this. You're getting the greatest digest ever. It's the version I wish I had lived through. So the actual discussion around a lot of these rules goes to the consent agenda, and I'll just set this up so Haley, you can go into it. But before the convention, they took a poll to say what should be the agenda. We've got more resolutions and proposals than we can hear at the convention. So we're going to take a poll, and that is going to help the convention come up with an agenda. And also, if something is very popular, we can stick it in a consent agenda. And this is important because The consent agenda is considered non-controversial things that there will be no debate on, and it's voted on as an entire package. So anything that's in the consent agenda, it's an up-down vote for everything in there. I think there are 7 items in the consent agenda. And the biggest issue is about like what's in there, what goes in, what comes out. Last convention, things came out of the consent agenda. So even if there is support, right, it's about whether or not you want to debate things. And I'll let Haley get into the actual specifics of that.
Thanks, Andy. So basically, you know, I want to kind of not make this stuff any more confusing than it already is, and kind of say what I think is a debate that exists that underlies why there were these debates around the consent agenda. And it basically goes to debates that are happening within DSA around internationalism. And so one of the controversial debates has been around Resolution 14, which is a resolution by the International Committee, which is basically a resolution that is aimed to ally DSA with various leadership bodies and parties within the Latin American left. And it's also aimed at having DSA join the Sao Paulo Forum. And so basically, one of the major issues with this, in my opinion, is that it means that we would be joining a body that has everyone from leadership that is already in state power, as well as various parties that, as we speak, are actually engaged in suppressing the rights of left-wing minorities or left-wing oppositions, not necessarily minorities, but even labor leaders and protest movements in various parts of Latin America. And so, you know, to me, being in solidarity is really about the question of, are we allying ourselves with people because they say they're socialists? Actually, there's a point where people said Obama was a socialist. I think that it actually matters what the content of that is, and whether it actually, as I said at the beginning, empowers movements for democracy from below by masses of working people, actually puts them in the driver's seat of their own destinies, or whether it is just about allying ourselves with people who call themselves socialists, kind of regardless of the content of those governments. And so I strongly feel that this is a debate that needs to be had. Of course, there are people who are going to disagree strongly with everything that I'm saying. But the point of the matter is that is the debate. And so in the consent agenda vote, 49% of people said that they did want to have this debate. In other words, when you voted on the consent agenda, you both had the ability to say whether you supported a resolution and also whether you thought it should come up for debate or whether it should not come up for debate and should just be added to a consent agenda. And so by a fairly slim margin of people, this got onto the consent agenda, despite the fact that people who also supported it felt that they wanted clarity on what the terms of this would be. They wanted to understand what joining would mean. They wanted to understand what this would mean in terms of DSA's international work and international solidarity work for the next 2 years. Now, even if a position is a minority position, the fact of the matter is we've all been in a debate room where we came in with one position or where we came in with questions, but we're leaning in one direction. And ultimately, we're swayed by the arguments in the room. And that, to me, is what democracy is. It's actually the opportunity for everybody to have their say. And because we don't have that period of the pre-convention period where these debates are not in the open, many delegates are actually coming to these discussions without any understanding of any of the stuff that I just said in terms of the background to these debates. And that's a big problem. We should actually be understanding them. We should actually, we actually want to have these debates in the open. What ended up happening instead, oh, and one last thing I should mention as well, only 650 delegates out of over 1,000 delegates, I think it's 1,200 plus delegates, were actually participating in the vote on the consent agenda. So that's yet another set of unknowns as far as how many people are actually in support of this or have questions about it. At the end of the day, what ended up happening is because we haven't been able to have this debate in the open, instead it became marred in sort of a proxy debate around procedures, which is the boring stuff that Andy was talking about before. In other words, instead of actually being able to engage in the content of the debate, by changing the rules from having minority positions be able to take something out of the consent agenda, if 10% of people vote to take it out of the consent agenda and have a debate on it. They wanted to raise the threshold. People who supported R14 wanted to raise the threshold to 33%, so a much higher bar to clear to be able to take something off of the consent agenda. And so instead of having the debate, they wanted to make it so that we would not actually be able to have this debate out in the open. What ended up happening is because the rules were changed overnight, really without any consultation or any explanation to the delegate body as to why it was changed, the rules then went from saying 10% of people would be needed in order to take something off the consent agenda to the next day when all the delegates got into the room saying, well, now we're doing it at 33%. You have to have 33% support in order to get it off the consent agenda. And so instead of the people who wanted a higher threshold being in the underdog position of having to defend why they wanted it to be raised to a third, the people who, like us, opposed raising the threshold were now in the position of having to argue the opposite. Anyway, it's quite, you can see how that's very confusing, but I think it underlies also what Andy said before about why all of these rules changes are so problematic, actually, and make it so difficult for delegates to go in with an understanding of what it is we're walking into, why we should have rules changed or not, what the current rules are. In other words, the NPC and the bodies that decide what the rule changes will be have discretion to change things on a whim, whereas we've had to put out proposals weeks and months in advance.
So what I'd add to that is if you're if you come into this convention and you're just like, okay, like I got all my stuff, here we go. And then you come into yesterday, right? What you end up seeing is, hey, I've got a rules change right away, right? Like right off the bat, it's if something comes out of the consent agenda, it has to go into the like main agenda, right? Which passed. And I actually think that's right? Like nobody's trying to say, take something out of the consent agenda and not debate it, right? The whole point is we would like to have a debate. So that we didn't even make that motion. That was made by the people that supported their international resolution, right? So that's the first thing, but it's not clear about like what happened. It's just like anything that gets pulled out is going to get that. Okay, so that's what you would see. Then after that, you would see another one that said that well, the threshold is too high, it should be lower, right? And you're like, why do they want to lower the threshold? Again, right, the thing is that literally into Saturday night, the rules that were given to every delegate that had been out for months had said, these are the rules. This is what everybody can expect. It's 10%, that's the number. And then that, like they only said that day in a highlight that we've changed that and those are going to be the proposed rules. It's actually 33, right? And so what was significant about that was that going into the weekend, right? We and other people said, hey, look, we will be like, we're going to be completely like straightforward. We are going to ask that this comes out of the consent agenda and that it gets debated, right? And the people that were the authors of that resolution were fucking pissed and said, well, they're going to make their own motion to raise the bar to 33 from 10, right? So, okay, fine, let's have a debate if that's the way you want to do it. What ends up happening is the rules committee does the switcheroo. And so now instead of being like, tell us why you think that everything should be higher, that just becomes the default, right? So that's weird. The third thing that you would see then after that is a motion, again, made by the people who have that want the thing to stay in the consent agenda, to give even more time to the consent agenda section to deal with what they know is going to be a debate about pulling the thing out. So we've actually spent all of this time debating whether or not we're even allowed to fucking debate a resolution. And so all of this time that we keep being told we don't have to talk about stuff that people care about is all being spent trying to make sure that this discussion doesn't happen, which is the stupidest thing out there. Like, I don't know how else to say it, but it's just it's a terrible waste of time. And people that even support this thing that say that I would like to know more about it, right? So that's like where all of this procedural shit looks terrible, and where I think what things looked like going into the weekend. I guess one last thing I should have said that I didn't say was that we ended Sunday with completely overtime with all of this stuff. And so we're not able to actually approve an agenda for the rest of the convention. So there's actually no business scheduled until Thursday evening. And because they wanted to adjourn to make sure people got to see the speakers that they had lined up, we have no official agenda that's been agreed to, and the convention committee has to write an entirely new one on Thursday. So the first order of business on Thursday is going to be approving the agenda. So we're already that far behind.
Oh yeah, the final thing I'll add is, Andy also mentioned how difficult it is to actually navigate the multiple tabs that you have to have open, the multiple forums that you have to have registered in order to even be considered like checked in and signed into the convention or to vote on something. Or it's like a very, I have deep respect for the people who have to respond to all the requests for, tech assistance, because of just how difficult it is to even get on Stack. It's actually very confusing. And if we're having discussions about substantial things or want to raise an objection, or a point of order if something happens that's out of order, it's just extremely difficult and challenging, especially speaking as someone who's the first time doing it. But a lot of people, it's the first time because this is our first convention that is happening totally virtually. And as as important as it is to be able to do that, it's also important that people be able to do it in a way that's not so confusing, So I should just say, several of us, when we actually did try to raise this motion to raise the threshold to 10% now that the rules had been changed overnight, or sorry, to lower the threshold to 10% now that the rules had been changed overnight, it was really difficult to get on Stack. Many of us were not called on when the chair called on people to debate the motion and take people for and against the motion. She actually took 3 people against and did not note that the person who was supposed to speak for actually spoke against, which meant that people had fewer opportunities in the limited time we had to hear the side for this motion. And when several of us tried to raise points of order, it was like first the navigation of, are we doing it in the right place? And then just suddenly being taken off Stack after we were told we were on Stack to raise that objection. So, there are a lot of other issues that, should have just been procedural, but seem to have been either politicized or perhaps it was unintentional. But regardless, it meant that we didn't actually get to do things in the way they should have been done.
Yeah. I mean, I think like it was already miserable having like, even when we were in person, like going through this kind of procedural stuff was miserable. And I don't, it's not super interesting to listen to. If you're a delegate, right? I mean, it's useful to know like what happened and try to make sense about like what's the subtext to all this shit, because like people are making motions and if you're not aware of what those discussions are, you don't know what's happening. But beyond that, I think that where we kind of land is like, all right, let's go back to the beginning. One, what's the point of the convention, right? In general, like we're socialists, we're always in a changing context. The world is not the same as it was 2 years ago. We have to talk about our priorities and our work, and how are we going to do that? And then, the convention is in part a vehicle for us to understand and to make those decisions together, but it also has to be a democratic body, right? It has to actually, it's like the whole point of having representative delegates and stuff is so that way we're able to come at this on an equal like playing field. We all know the same rules, we've all prepared the same way. And the major issue that we're raising about this rules thing is when you change the rules and stuff like that, you're actually giving an advantage to people who wrote the rules, who know all that stuff, and everybody who's not aware suddenly has to reorient to what's going on. What that does is get in the way of the actual politics, right? Like the point of the rules is to say, all right, so we're all in the same thing. I want to make my case, and now I know the way to do that, right? If you obstruct that by changing all the technical shit, what it does is it just gets in the way of people trying to get the stuff done. Like Robert's rules has all kinds of things that are useful about it in terms of parliamentary procedure, but it's also subject to a whole lot of messing around, and people can be excellent at using it to stop the conversation from happening. I'm not like going to throw that around like that's what everybody is trying to do. There's certainly times where I understand people really mean the best and stuff comes out, right? And well, it was like a one hard decision or the other. Understood, got it, right? But the effect is still the same, right? The effect of being like, who knows what's going to happen? Who's got the heads up that can be better prepared and all kinds of stuff like that. So I think if we end out, because it sounds like there's some questions that people have asked, right? Like there's three things I think that we want to end out with. One, which is that it sounds like they're not even going to entertain debates about this consent agenda issue on Thursday when it comes up. So as explicitly as I can say, please vote yes to remove Resolution 14 from the consent agenda, right? We want to have a debate about it. If you want to vote for it, please vote for it if that's what you believe in, but it's really important that people understand it and that people who don't agree get their opportunity to explain, right? Two, we need to think about how is the best way that we're making use of a socialist convention, right? What are the things that we should be talking about that are absent? Right now, there's nothing else that can be done, right? This is what it is. But for the future, we really do need to think about how are we structuring these things to be political and then also to be as democratic as possible. I've raised this issue about the pre-convention before during the last convention as one of my recaps, but here we are again. And the last thing is we have two items from Tempest that are on the convention agenda, Resolution 38 and Constitution change number 5. 38 is about criteria for national endorsements, not local ones. And Constitution change 5 is about having a recall process and transparency in the leadership. So as plainly as I can say, yes, remove 14 from the consent agenda. Yes, vote for 38. Yes, vote for CB5. And I'll kick it to Haley before we do anything else.
Yeah, so I know there's some questions that have come up, so we're going to get to those, but I just want to wrap up on just kind of some takeaways. To me, what is really at stake in this convention? What are really key questions that we want to still make sure actually get addressed? Whether they get addressed in this convention or not, they're, to me, what are the big stakes for the left moving forward. So to go back to what Andy mentioned, DSA's growth has slowed after becoming the largest organization on the US left in a very short period of time. And, we should be having a discussion, which is not happening, about why that is. There isn't an analysis from DSA leadership of why that is. We're basically just being told we need to DSA harder. To put it very bluntly, I think that we actually need a real assessment of why that is. There was a period when, the Sanders campaign was on the map, when the Trump presidency was a major threat. And those two things were the context, as well as multiple movements around Occupy Wall Street, around Black Lives Matter, around Standing Rock, going through to the present, that have really informed this very volatile period, but have also put class politics and anti-racist politics, and really the politics of anti-capitalism out there in a way that hadn't been there previously. And I think there's still an audience for that. But why isn't DSA growing in the context of the largest anti-racist movement in history? Why aren't we having an influx of that? There's certainly proposals aimed at trying to have more members of color and target that, and I think that's very good and important. But we should actually have an assessment of what it is that we're doing now versus what we should be doing to make that happen. So that's at least one thing. The internationalism stuff, I've already gone on, and as Andy said, I really encourage people on Thursday to vote yes on taking the Resolution 14 out of the consent agenda so that we can actually have that debate. Whether you agree with it or not, we should be able to have that debate in the open. There's also questions about democracy within our own organization. It's part of why Tempest put forward resolutions around being able to have a leadership that is recallable, so that we're not actually waiting 2 years to just vote people out when something egregious happens. Like we had a cop who was elected to a body of the DSA. That shouldn't have happened. But if people, if it happened and people felt differently, or if people act in a certain way, that's a basic right that exists in almost every union. It exists, in most places. Throughout, going all the way back to the Paris Commune, it's part of the socialist tradition, and it should exist in our organization. It's also a resolution that's aimed at actually making sure that we elect our own NPC. Right now, people are appointed to the NPC when there's a vacancy. In this case, we think there should actually be an election for people when that kind of thing happens. If people have to step back, the members should actually have a say in who serves in that position. We also have a separate proposal. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't think I said the number of that. If people are wondering, that's Constitutional Amendment 5. Yes. And then we also have a proposal aimed at actually maintaining the position of independence from the two-party system, and actually the goal of building an independent party as something that DSA should maintain and should continue to strive for in Resolution 38, a socialist horizon. That is a big debate, as well as whether what we're doing is ultimately prioritizing elections within a party that's totally hostile to us, or whether our goal is to do as much as we can to actually build an alternative to that and take steps towards doing that. So, and have accountability for who it is we endorse. They should actually support the positions that we think socialists should support. So those are the two things, Resolution 38 and Constitutional Amendment 5.
Okay, so there are some questions that are in this chat. I'm sorry that it's taken us a little bit to get to them. So thank you for your patience. The first one is, what is the status of Resolution 14 right now? Can it be defeated? All right, so it is not a done deal. The status is that it is in the consent agenda. So there are 13 items that are in the consent agenda currently. What that would mean is that there is going to be a vote where you would accept every single thing that's in there, up or down. And if you vote it down, it means that you would have to vote everything down. So that's part of the thing about being able to pull something in or out, is that you don't want to tank every resolution if there's not a problem with them because you're upset about one, right? So it will need, based off of the rules that have been adopted, a third of the delegates to vote in favor of taking Resolution 14 out of the consent agenda. So that is going to be the primary issue, right? Is that before this debate can even begin, we will have to have 1/3 of the delegates who vote in favor of taking the item out, so that way it can be discussed. At that point, if it succeeds and it gets placed on the agenda on its own, then it would have its own debate schedule. So the makers of the motion would say what it is and why. There would be 3 people that would speak, that would have the chance on either side to speak for and against it, right? And then the delegates would be able to take their own vote on that issue. The other things that are in the consent agenda are a committee for reparations for Black people, mass abolition work, a campaign for voting rights, an eco-socialist priority, tenant organizing, size inclusivity, YDSA, strengthening YDSA, multiracial organization, Spanish translation, so stuff like that, right? For the most part, those are, you can see that there's a huge political differentiation between most of those items that are in the consent agenda. A lot of those resolutions that are in there are pretty straightforward. Do this thing, right? Or this is kind of what we think that we'll have to do our work. The reason why R14 is politically very different than the rest of them is that it's not just saying like, we should have a committee that figures stuff out. It's saying this will be the position of it, this will be the goals, and those are already decided in advance. And those are things that are like honestly hotly contested. Maybe, I mean, Haley, in a sec, maybe you might want to talk about why they're contested, because people might be sick of just hearing, well, we want to debate, when they don't know why. So we can talk about that. But so that's the status of it. And I see one last question. How did the Rules Committee justify making the change to 33% unilateral? They did not. They just said it had been changed. It was, I made a point of information motion and they just stated, yes, it is different. And then that was the end of that.
Right, so I think those are all the questions. If we see any more, we could stay on a little bit longer, but to get to what Andy was saying about the substance of the debate on R14, once again, it's a proposal that DSA ally with left-wing parties and organizations in Latin America, and specifically that it joined the Sao Paulo Forum. So that would mean that we're in the same organization right now as Maduro. It means, you know, it raises questions about how we actually end up raising debates with, or who it is that we're actually in solidarity with in the context of left-wing struggles from below. And to me, you know, the debate is really about the question that's kind of at the heart of what we're doing in Tempest, which is socialism from above versus socialism from below. In other words, there's a tendency within the socialist tradition that sees socialism as something that can either be elected into power, that it's just about the number of people that we have in elected office that is a measure of whether we're succeeding or able to enact socialist demands, and that also is a top-down version of socialism that is the person who is in authority, whether it's an individual or whether it is a government, is the equivalent of socialism. And I, you know, think that we in Tempest subscribe to the opposite, which is socialism from below. I believe that's in the Marxist tradition, which is the idea that the working class and no other class can be the maker of its own self-emancipation, meaning we're not looking for someone else to come and lead us out of the wilderness, as Eugene Debs said, but we actually are looking to have the most democracy, the most say, the most workers' power actually not being a measure of someone being in the government and doing it for us, but workers themselves making the decisions in the factory, in the workplace, in their schools, in their communities, and about what the future of our society looks like. So to me, that's what the stakes are as far as why, when it comes to international solidarity, we need to be in alliance, not with those governments, not with those states, and not with those parties, but actually with the people who are contesting many of the things those parties are doing, and more importantly, who are organizing the actual basis of socialism, which is the people.
The only thing that I would add to that is that that this is also a debate that is not new, right? Like this is the way this is being presented by people who are the proponents of Resolution 14 is that like, oh, you know, like we're some fringe people, and everybody that is in Latin America thinks this, which is like just completely not true. There's been debates over Chavismo since, you know, Chavez appeared in the late 90s. There's been debates about the pink tide from many Latin American leftists. So like this isn't something where there is a singular consensus, right? It is a larger issue than any single person's tendency or something like that. I mean, like it does reflect like a general hard issue, right? That people do have to face. But I think it's very reductive to just go like, oh, well, we're in the U.S. and so we don't understand anything, and that's not how it is, and everybody else everywhere else agrees on this. That is not what's happening. Natalia wrote, I think, a very excellent article that explained that on our website on Tempest, you know, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, like Federico Fuentes, who is a journalist that was very sympathetic to Chavismo, has been somebody that's recently come out with something documenting how the changes in the regime have gone, and moving towards a position where saying that we have to actually engage and think critically about what this is, right? So that's coming from somebody that's very much a supporter. All right. There are two more questions that are in the chat. I'll deal with, I think, the more straightforward one first, and then the second one is a bigger one. So the first one is, why do we support single transferable vote over board account to elect the National Political Committee? All right, so I did not know what either of these things were until I joined DSA. I had never heard of the board account. I had never heard of single transferable vote, right? I think in general, socialists understand are in favor of proportional representation. And so the board account is, it's a convoluted system that's a points-based scoring. And it's usually used in like sports ranking. But what it does is it allows people that can command a significant number of votes to really strategically vote and increase their share of seats above the actual support that they have proportionally. That's to me the main issue with it, right? Is that there's all kinds of documents that people can read. They're very boring, but in a nutshell, it's intended to weed out minority opinions and to just go on the basis of broad support, right? And so single transferable vote is designed to to allow for minority opinions if they gain enough support to get seated, right? So and that's based off of people's political support. That seems much more important to us if we're a multi-tendency organization also, that the actual tendencies that make up the organization are represented well. If they're not represented, then people are just going to vote with their feet and say, fuck this.
Right. So I'll get to the other question that's still left, which is, it appears from outside of DSA, as someone active on the left and labor, that most DSA members are not paying close attention to or debating this convention. Is that accurate? And if so, how do you understand the underwhelming attention to the convention and the direction of DSA? I think that one thing we've come across pretty frequently in talking to other people in other caucuses or people who are you know, in our branches, just kind of been trying to follow all of this. There is a real sense that national DSA is not something that most people have any opportunity to shape, or that has much impact on what the direction of the organization is at all, that a lot of that stuff happens locally. And there's some truth to both of those things. In other words, on the one hand, what is the public face of what we do? What people do we endorse? What positions do we take at the national level? very much because of the fact that we haven't had a long period of, or a period where people have been able to weigh in or hear these debates or have them out in the open prior to the convention, it means that a lot of this stuff ends up being dominated by the most popular caucuses, or the most people who know the most about how DSA works, whether that's people who are themselves already staffers or people who have been around long enough. And to me, it's the same reason that we're not having an informed debate, but are actually having procedural discussions about internationalism, but really about any number of things in DSA, which is to say, instead of us trying to have an active membership where people have a sense that what they say matters, there are just too many meetings where people come in and the rules are already set. And there isn't a lot of input on how we came to those decisions, why those decisions are the way that they are. This is just kind of how it's done. I think that, despite having nearly 100,000 members, the fact that in most chapters only 10% of people are actively participating, the fact that even among delegates, only a certain percentage are participating in the actual Slack discussions that we're having about the convention, really speaks to, I think, some of the deficits and some of the weaknesses that currently exist in DSA as far as actually empowering and educating and making our members feel that they really have a way to shape this organization. I don't know if it's a matter of people voting with their feet or if people are not active. There are probably a wide range of reasons that people are not active. I can't speak to all of those because I'm not in every chapter, but it's one of the things that it would have been really, I think, important and will be important in the future for us to have reports and assessments of.
Yeah, I mean, objectively, the engagement is down. And I say that because there are fewer people that submitted resolutions. There are, like when I asked for people to report their delegate races, there are fewer people who ran for delegate, fewer people who voted in those. I mean, I think like a lot of it is right now it's only speculation, right? I mean, like it's hard to pick this out, but I think that are people not paying as much attention to this? Yeah, I think that they're not paying as much attention. I think in part because like, there's like all kinds of just like, it's overwhelming. And at the end of the day, you do have to ask yourself, like, how consequential is this for the work that I'm doing, right? And particularly after the experience of the last two conventions, where the organization is just kind of done, like the National has gone and done whatever it wanted, regardless of what anybody voted for at the convention. And people kind of get trained that, like, what does it matter? I mean, we're going to go do what we're going to do, and they're going to go do what they're going to do. So, like, why waste my weekend on something, right? And I don't say that to be reductive or dismissive. I mean, I have that fucking response when, I'm like, do I want to spend my weekend sitting on a very technical Zoom that is like, it's frustrating. It's like, it's alienating, like, and like the convention, and when it's in person, at least, you have like, you're meeting people and there's a big social component. I mean, this is very atomized, and, it comes after a year of COVID. And frankly, we're in a completely different political moment now, right? I mean, the Trump years are done, or at least paused. And the Sanders challenge is over, right? And that was one of the major things that was a North Star for DSA, right? So people are disoriented, and I think they're pretty beaten up. And I think that all of those are contributing factors.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say, because I think that there's also a debate about whether or not there's both the obstacles we've just discussed to being able to engage at the national level with DSA. But to me, it's also a problem if we're not actually in a position to contest what does happen. In other words, I don't think that it is completely irrelevant what direction DSA takes. So just to be clear, even though I think it's very easy to feel that it's much easier to shape what happens locally and therefore to only focus on that. But the reality is, if the future of the left runs through DSA at all, then it's actually going to be extremely important whether DSA is seen as a national entity that's able to intervene in a productive way, in a way that actually is meaningful in the lives of ordinary working class people, is an organization that's reflective of that class and includes people from that class and is not just kind of outside that class to some extent. There's lots of questions that to me are actually questions of what our strategy is at the national level. And so far, DSA has been able to not really have these discussions because it was growing on the basis of, as Andy mentioned, the Sanders campaign and a number of electoral victories. And so the question now is like, well, but what is it actually going to take, not just to get people in office, but to actually agitate for Medicare for all? Not just getting more people elected, but like, how do we actually win that? What is that going to take things that happen in our workplaces? Is that going to take actual workplace action? How do we get to the level to be able to not just change who's in office, but change the balance of class forces? Those are much bigger questions that we would have to actually be engaged in, and would take a different strategy, frankly, from what DSA has prioritized. In fact, there are resolutions about whether the future of DSA is about strategizing or prioritizing a strategy of continuing elections and mostly continuing elections as the primary thing that DSA does at the national level. And I think that that would be a mistake. I think we actually have to assess those things. And I think there's a reason that we've hit a ceiling.
Well, we're almost at 7 Central or 8 Eastern. So I think we'll probably wrap up, but I super appreciate people tuning in, and hopefully this was helpful. We're gonna do another one of these on Friday night to go over what business happened Thursday and Friday. And then we'll do another one after the convention has wrapped, probably next week, Monday or Sunday night, depending. So please, pencil that in, tune in if you can. Again, please vote yes if you're a delegate to pull R14 out of the consent agenda, so that way it may be debated. And then also please vote yes on Resolution 38 and Constitution 5. All right. Good night, comrades.
Good night, comrades. Thank you.